Hey, welcome to the Board Game Network. I'm going to be teaching you how to play this game called Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, put out by Gray Fox Games. This is a game similar to One Night Ultimate Werewolf or any of those games put out by that company like Coup or Vampire or Spyfall, if you're familiar with that one, where one person's the bad guy and everybody else is trying to figure out who he is. It plays in 15 to 30 minutes, so pretty quick game, 14 years and up, 4 to 12 players, so big group game type of game. What happens is a murder occurs and you are investigating at the scene of the crime, and so you must deduce the means of the murder and the key evidence. The means of the murder is this blue stack of cards. The key evidence is this red stack of cards here. And so the killer is also among the investigators, so he can sow confusion among the investigators and try to lead people off the path. The forensic scientist gives clues. And so what happens is everybody is dealt 4 blue cards, 4 red cards, the means of the murder and the key evidence. And then here are the roll cards. You got a forensic scientist, a witness, a murderer, and an accomplice. Now the murderer and the forensic scientist are always in the game. The witness and the accomplice are optional. 6 players and more. When there's 6 players and more, those are optional to stick in there. I would suggest you do, but if you're going to put one in, you need to put both in, because the witness without an accomplice makes the game too easy. An accomplice without a witness doesn't make any sense. It doesn't do anything to the game. Everybody else gets an investigator, so depending on how many players you have, you're going to take a forensic scientist, a murderer, and if you put the witness and the accomplice in with 6 players and more, then you fill up the number of players with investigators, depending on how many players you got. If you're not playing with the witness and the accomplice, then you just fill out with more investigators. You're going to mix those, turn them over, mix them up, and then deal them out to each player. Everybody's going to look at their card, and the forensic scientist is going to flip his card over. Everybody's going to know who the forensic scientist is. And then the forensic scientist is going to discard his evidence cards out here because we know he wasn't the murderer. And the point of dealing these out before you deal these out is, I believe, probably so everybody can get familiar and look around at everybody else's cards and see what's out there before these get dealt out. That makes it easier for, less likely that the murderer will be picked out, because the forensic scientist is going to know who the murderer is. The witness is going to know the murderer or the accomplice, and so it's just better if you do it in that order. The forensic scientist reveals his cards, discards his other ones, and then each other player also gets a badge token. Every player gets a badge except for the forensic scientist. The murderer does, the accomplice does, the witness does, everybody does, and all the investigators. The forensic scientist cannot discuss evidence. His main purpose is to give clues, but he's using these cards here to do that. So what happens is everybody closes their eyes, except for the forensic scientist, and the forensic scientist leads this. And the forensic scientist says, okay, murderer and accomplice, open your eyes, if there's an accomplice. And then the murderer is going to point to 2 of his cards, 1 blue and 1 red card. So he's telling what the means of the murder is and what the key evidence is. He's going to point to them. And so the forensic scientist knows the means of murder and the key evidence. And the accomplice also is going to know that, if there is one. Then they're going to close their eyes, and then the forensic scientist is going to ask the witness to open their eyes, if there's a witness, and he's going to point to the murderer and the accomplice. That's all the information the witness gets. He doesn't see the crime, he doesn't know who the murderer is or who the accomplice is. He just sees them running out of the location. So he knows those 2 were involved. Then everybody's going to close their eyes again and reopen their eyes. So at this point, then the forensic scientist is going to start giving clues to the key evidence and the means of the murder. Okay, so he's going to put the cause of death tile out here. He's going to look through the location of crime tiles. There's 4 of those, and he's going to pick one of them, whichever one he thinks was the best one. Let's say there was an arson and an oil stain. Let's say those are the 2 pieces of evidence. So maybe the arson, you look at the location of crime, and you know, I don't know, maybe something leads you to think that that happened at a pub or something, so you pick this location of crime. And then these are shuffled and 4 of them get dealt up. Okay, so then the forensic scientist is going to take bullets and he's going to put them down in the clues that he wants to give to the investigators. And he can do this as fast or as slow as he wants. He does it one scene tile at a time, and he only puts 1 bullet on 1 tile. So he's got 6 bullets and 6 tiles, so eventually each one will have 1. And for sure, like if you looked at the cause of death, well, accident is one of the possibilities. Well, arson and oil stain doesn't lead you to think it's an accident. It wouldn't lead you to think it's a poisoning. An illness or a disease, a loss of blood, severe injury, or suffocation, you're going to say, well, you know what, burning to death, that's probably a severe injury maybe. So that would eliminate surgery. Eliminate, you know, he's trying to eliminate things down. So give people time to discuss this. He's going to throw down bullets on these until all of them have 1 bullet each. As so. And then what happens is he gives time for presentations. Each player, starting to the left of him and rotating around, gives a presentation about 30 seconds or so. And all they're going to do is say, well, you know what, I think with this evidence, I think it looks like maybe this person might have done it, or and maybe these, you know, maybe it was scissors and the suit, or gives whatever kind of feedback he wants, and it rotates around. Each player does that. Okay, nobody can interrupt during that phase, during the presentation, except for if you're going to make an accusation, if you're going to use your badge token to do an accusation, you can interrupt at any time and say, I'm going to accuse so-and-so, I think it's these 2. Okay, and then the forensic scientist, the only thing he does is say yes or no. If he says no, the game goes on. The guy turns in his the investigator turns in his badge token. He can no longer do an accusation. However, he can still participate. He still gives presentations. He still discusses stuff. And the murderer and the accomplice have badge tokens too, so they can use those to throw off by making accusations. So that's round 1. Then round 2 happens. You draw a new tile. You look at it. You discard one of these, any one you want to discard. You put it down and you give another piece of evidence. And people had time to do discussions, but when you give the evidence, then it's time to do your presentations again. Then the 3rd round, you draw another one. You discard one of these. Give time for discussion. Give a new piece of evidence. And that's the 3rd round. At the end of the 3rd round, when the last person has given their presentation, the game ends if it hasn't ended already with an accusation, a correct accusation, or everybody's used all their badge tokens. If everybody uses all their badge tokens and nobody gets it right, then the murderer gets away, the accomplice and the murderer win. If nobody has made an accusation, or if everybody hasn't made their accusation by the end of the 3rd round, the last player, and then didn't get a chance to do it. So you snooze, you lose there. If you make an accusation and it's incorrect, then the forensic scientist just says no and goes on with the game after the badge is turned in. If it's correct, the investigators, the forensic scientist, and the witness all win the game, unless the murderer and the accomplice, they get a time to discuss and they get to assassinate somebody. And if they get the witness, then they have murdered the witness before the trial and they get away with it and win the game. So the witness during this game definitely wants to be quiet about that he's the witness. He wants to be very obscure and not let himself be known on who he is. He wants to look around and not just focus on the murderer and the accomplice. If all players have been incorrect by the end of the third round or at any time during the game, then the murderer and the accomplice win the game. There are a couple of variants to this game. I've explained the basic game, that's how it works. There are these event cards, there are 6 of them, and once you've gone through round 1, then you mix these into these tiles here and then draw like normal. So you may end up with an event instead of another scene tile. And I'll just read a couple of these to you. It says the forensic scientist chooses one of the scene tiles on display and moves its marker to a new item on the same tile. Discard this event tile. So instead of getting a new piece of evidence, he's going to keep the same one and change it. I'm not sure whether I would like that or I would like a new one. Might depend on what the tile is. Here's another one. The forensic scientist draws 5 scene tiles from which they choose one to replace any existing tile on display. The selected tile cannot be another event. Discard this event card. So instead of drawing 1, you get to draw 5 and pick the one you like. Wow, how nice is that? That would be a nice event tile to get. So that's one of your variants. The other variant is if you want to adjust the difficulty. If you want to make the game harder, if you're finding it's too easy, then you deal 5 of each type of card to each player. 5 blue cards, 5 red cards. That will make it harder to catch the murderer. If you want to make it easier, then you deal 3 of each kind to each player. So that'll make it easier. Okay, that is Deception, Murder in Hong Kong. Make sure you tune into all of our How to Play videos here at the Board Game Network. Unboxings, specials, and make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel to keep up to date on all the videos that we post here at the Board Game Network.